Us lads at 1000 PS are off-road again. For example, Carlos took his Himalayan out. Scharf came along with the BMW F800 GS. My good old trusty Tenere got dusted off too. And Marcel, our social media mate, he's riding on loose ground for the very first time, and he's doing it on the mighty Honda X-ADV. So, how well that works, we're checking it out on Hungary's TET route. Hey there, greetings! And here I am, completely drenched in sweat, reporting back 2 days later after 2 really great days of riding the Honda X-ADV. This one's our long-term tester, which means it's been in our garage for quite a while now. Not long ago, Nils did a general long-term test video on the X-ADV. You can check that out if you want a broader overview. Anyway, we thought, weather's great, it's been a proper hot weekend at the end of May. Time to finally take it on a bit of an enduro tour. None of us knew Hungary's TET route, and Marcel, our social media colleague here at 1000 PS, the one currently holding the camera/phone, said he'd be up for joining in. Only thing is, he doesn't have an off-road bike. So we thought, let's give the X-ADV a proper run in line with its adventure name. And the Hungarian TET, to give you an idea, isn't exactly about steep climbs and descents. Makes sense. Hungary is a fairly flat country, but it's very varied. We started off riding through the Danube wetlands, starting from the Tira section of the Hungarian TET. That's a kind of offshoot coming from the tri-point of Austria, Slovakia and Hungary, heading towards Budapest. We didn't manage the whole stretch though, there were a few little tumbles along the way. As you can see, the X-ADV took some hits. Sorry Honda, but Marcel will tell you more about that himself. In the wetlands we had a bit of mud, loads of gravel tracks, some deeper than others, forest trails too. Then as we got closer to Budapest and rode what's called the fifth arm of the Hungarian TET, most of it ran through fields and over hills, mostly made up of 90-degree bends. We were riding almost entirely on dirt roads by that point, some of them pretty rocky. So all in all, a proper mix of terrain to put the adventure in X-ADV to the test. And before Marcel shares his riding impressions, I thought I'd quickly mention the off-road relevant specs and whether or not they're suited for this sort of riding. So the X-ADV runs a 750 engine, putting out 59 horsepower and a solid 69 Newton meters of torque at 4,750 revs. So it really gives you a nice shove, definitely a plus off-road. Of course, it's a fairly heavy machine, as we weighed it at 241 kilograms with a full tank on our scale. But even with that weight, the center of gravity is impressively low, and that's a massive advantage off-road. I'd say that on the Hungarian TET, the weight didn't really pose a problem. It's not the most demanding terrain, so it worked out fine. But we're trying to be realistic here. People like Marcel, who aren't off-road veterans yet, might own a bike like this and take it onto some dirt tracks. And when you do that, you'll likely stick to the easier unpaved paths rather than doing any crazy hill climbs. So yeah, we're trying to keep things grounded, tires and wheels. Now that's an interesting topic. Up front, it's got a 120 section tire on a 17-inch rim, and at the back a 160 on a 15-inch rim. Tubeless wheels, of course, but there are still a few compromises to be made. It's still a scooter after all. And obviously, one of the big issues is tire choice for off-road. From what I've found, the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR is available in these sizes. You could fit those on, maybe a touch more off-road capable, or at least on par with the Bridgestone AX 41T it currently has. There's also the Bridgestone Trailwing, but they're all a bit of a limiting factor on their own. Suspension travel, 153.5 millimeters at the front, 150 at the rear. Adjustable preload. In my view, it worked really well today. on these easier tracks. As long as you ride with a bit of sense and ease off the throttle over bigger bumps, it doesn't bottom out harshly. So it wasn't the kind of constant bottoming out session I feared beforehand. And another plus point, especially for newcomers to off-road riding, is the DCT. The dual clutch transmission really simplifies things. Marcel will have something to say about that as well. You don't have to worry about shifting gears, just twist the throttle and go. From experience, DCT also works really well on loose ground, like on the Africa Twin. And braking for riders not used to modulating the rear brake with their foot, here you can just use your hands. So again, it's a clever concept. But I think I've hyped it up enough for now. And since I've been talking so much about light off-road and how this machine is built for a certain kind of terrain, well, today we definitely pushed the X-ADV out of its comfort zone on purpose. And I think Marcel did too, just like the rest of us at times. At the start you saw more bikes, but sadly we're already down one. Carlos had a crash and couldn't continue the ride with us, so please excuse the slightly rough and ready videography in this video. In the stress of getting Carlos out of the wild and back to civilization, arranging hospital transport and all that, we totally forgot to take the camera and all the gear out of his luggage. So now it's just me, a few GoPros, and that's it. Still, I hope the content's interesting. And with that, Marcel, come on, let's swap over.
Hi everyone, Servus, I'm Marcel. Yeah, I've never actually been in a 1000 PS YouTube video before. Usually I'm behind the camera, mainly doing social media stuff, anything in portrait format. But anyway, it's not about me, it's about my impressions of the X-ADV. Like Gregor already mentioned, I'm someone who, even if I don't quite look like it, just properly rode off-road for the first time. I've had a few off-road encounters in our tests before, just transporting bikes from A to B, even on rough ground, but I wouldn't call that real experience. This was the first proper tour we set off on as a trio. Well, actually as a group of 4, but Gregor already explained why we ended up just 3. So I'll share a bit of how it felt, because the bike really gives off the impression that it can handle off-road. And we thought, let's test that, see where the limits are. And I have to say, it's incredibly manageable for beginners. I've ridden on the road for 10 years now, just to give you some context, and only done a handful of brief off-road stints. So jumping onto a scooter, or call it what you like, where you don't have to worry about shifting gears because that's entirely taken out of the equation, where the rear brake is up by your hands instead of your feet, really lets you focus fully on the road ahead. You can pay attention to your line, something you're already used to from road riding, looking far ahead into corners, scanning the terrain, and that all transfers over. But still, I basically had to relearn everything. The handlebars wobble left to right, there's constant vibration, sometimes a rock knocks the bars sideways, né? And as a beginner, it's just not what you're used to, all that movement. But Gregor and Scharf were super helpful and kept telling me, stay relaxed, shift your weight back. And that really made a huge difference. You improve so much so quickly. Now, let's talk about a downside. The ergonomics. I've ridden quite a few bikes off-road, although only for about 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at a time. Nothing serious. But you immediately notice the ergonomics aren't ideal for off-road. The side extensions are quite wide, and after a while they really dig into your calves. It's fine, it works, but you realize you can't shift your weight back properly, and over time it starts to wear on you. I'm quite tall, 1m89, 1m88 maybe, and you do feel a bit hunched over. It's clearly built for the road, probably 80-20 or 90-10 split road to off-road, but for the road it's brilliant. When standing up, especially as a tall rider, you're leaning forward a bit, knees bent awkwardly in, but surprisingly it works. We rode off-road for 4 or 5 hours straight today, and it honestly worked really well. The suspension, sure, it bottoms out now and again, sometimes quite hard, but that's manageable. It's not something that makes you feel unsafe. Gregor and I swapped bikes briefly, once I jumped on his Tenere. That's a proper off-road machine. I'd ridden it once before off-road, just a quick A to B during our off-road testing days, and you immediately notice the massive difference compared to a serious adventure bike. But for a beginner, that can be overwhelming, that massive front wheel kind of picks its own line and you end up just steering it along. You're not used to that. With the X-ADV, because of its weight and wheel dimensions, also the width, it feels more like a road bike just moving over gravel. That makes it more predictable, although not always. As you can probably tell from what Gregor said, I dropped it once too, or rather I crashed it once. For me, over these 3 days, deep gravel was the biggest challenge. We did some mild hill climbs over big rocks, that was fine, but the deep gravel, that really unsettled me. The front wheel is just 120 millimeters wide and it doesn't dig into the terrains, it just floats. At one point, as you'll see in the video, we hit about 20 centimeters of deep gravel. That was just too much. The front gave way instantly. I didn't react properly, I didn't know how to. As a beginner, should I throw my weight back, stay forward? I stayed on the throttle because people had told me best to go through at a steady pace. Not too fast, but don't crawl either. Still, the front tugged. I couldn't respond in time. It over-rotated and down I went. No damage though. And to be fair, the X-ADV, even with its nearly 240 kilos, handled the fall well. The handguard took a bit of a knock, but we fixed that with zip ties.
Da muss ich was anmerken.
I've got to jump in here. I fixed it later on because I hadn't understood the system. It actually just clips in with a little rail and a rubber plug that locks in at the back. So the zip tie wasn't even needed. You could say the handguard came through the crash unscathed.
And I have to say, we've got crash bars fitted. I don't think they're standard. They're from Honda's accessory catalog. We've also got SW Motec protection on the bike. None of that took any damage. The axle sliders, front and rear, not even a scratch. There's a bit of wear, but that's just from the deep gravel. You float around a bit and pick up some dings. But really, considering it's a 240 kilo machine and went down at 20 or 30 kilometers per hour, hardly anything broke. No warning lights either. And lifting it back up, I thought this will be tough, especially with the low center of gravity. But Carlos and I, and we're not exactly bodybuilders, managed it easily. Once you get past that first tipping point, it's suddenly light. I was honestly surprised by how manageable it is. That low center of gravity makes a huge difference, especially for beginners. I've ridden it a lot, even in the city, with my girlfriend on the back. And it's just so accessible. The DCT, the easy handling, no gear shifting, especially off-road. And that low center of gravity really gives you confidence. Another thing, I wondered what to do about luggage. We've got an SW Motec top box on the back, but the lad said, that's dead weight off-road. It hits like a sledgehammer. So I thought, why not test it with just under-seat storage? And honestly, I got everything I needed in there for 4 days. I'd been at the Slovakia ring just before this, filming with 1000 PS, and still managed to pack for this trip too. Sure, it's a bit Spartan, you're not heading to any fine dining places, but we're staying in a hut in the middle of Hungary, and it totally works. According to Gregor, and most off-road riders really, keeping your luggage weight low and central is key. That's exactly what this setup offers. Nothing vibrates, nothing wobbles, it's brilliant. So for beginners, honestly, top marks.
Dominanz, absolute Dominanz.
So there you have it, Marcel. I think you've covered just about everything. I did take a short spin on it too. I'd say you were on the X-ADV for 90% of the time and I was enjoying my Tenere. But even with a bit more off-road experience, I've got to say this thing works surprisingly well. The suspension, for example, responds really nicely. Predictable, not overly bouncy, no annoying rebound that gets worse the more you ride. It's stable. And agility-wise, it's actually quite fun even for off-roaders. Of course, you've got to be a bit careful over the bigger bumps, small wheels, shorter suspension travel and all that. But with a bit of restraint, it handles it. The engine is easy to modulate too. Now, traction control, switching it off completely is a bit of a pain because on Honda models it tends to re-engage quite quickly and conservatively. Still, when I tested it in the weakest setting, it made sense for riders who are off-road but want a bit of a safety net. That brings me to what I'd say are the only two real weaknesses of the X-ADV, even when you remind yourself that this isn't a proper off-road bike but a scooter. First, sometimes, especially in slippery conditions, you're on the throttle and the power just drops off completely for a second, then bang, it comes back. That lag can be annoying. And when you look at the competition, say the Suzuki DRZ 400, you get a much smoother gravel traction control system, so Honda could definitely tweak that. Second weak point, the fairing. Aside from the ergonomics, which are mostly fine, especially with the extra pair of off-road foot pegs, the side fairing is just too blocky and wide. That doesn't just create pressure points, as Marcel mentioned after riding for 2 days, but it also stops you from shifting your weight back properly. You end up standing kind of awkwardly, legs bowed out, and that's just not necessary. A redesign here could make a big difference, and that's a shame because the X-ADV really impressed us over these 2 days. It was a genuine show of force. It handled way beyond its comfort zone. So, a few tweaks to the ergonomics and it could be even better. Oh, nearly forgot. ABS. Rear ABS can't be turned off completely. There's only an off-road ABS setting. But again, if you keep in mind that most owners won't be die-hard off-roaders and will mainly be using it on lighter terrain, the off-road ABS is fine. And I think that just about covers it. It's Saturday evening, time to call it a day. You might even hear the music drifting up from the valley below. We're going to treat ourselves to a beer now. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment and let us know what you think of the X-ADV. Was it a proper adventure outing or should it stick to the city? Marcel Oester, massive respect. You really pulled through. The terrain wasn't easy at all, especially with no off-road experience and on a machine that's not exactly made for this. Epic, honestly. You were brilliant. And the X-ADV, it was brilliant too. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye bye.